Today we're going to learn how to model our very own crate. Now when I have you model this crate, I want to make sure that you guys use your own creativity and add your own elements to it. But I will show you some techniques that will help you along your way when you're doing so. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually create a project window, and I'm going to create a new project on my desktop, and we'll hit select here and hit accept. Alright, now that I have that project accepted, I can do my file save scene, and it will go into that new project. So I can name this crate start. There we go. Alright, and now we can get moving. Alright, so we have this crate ready to go, or excuse me, my scene ready to go. Let's go ahead and hold our shift key and right click and go to polycube. And let's scale this polycube up so we have some room to work with. And now let's go ahead and do our edit mesh extrude. Now I want to extrude every face here, so I'm going to actually grab all of the faces using my marquee tool and edit mesh extrude. And here's a little secret. What I'm going to do is actually take off this function keep faces together. So I'm going to turn that off. And what this allows me to do is it actually allows me to scale in my faces, so you can kind of see it's uniformly scaling when I extrude those faces down on all of my sides to keep it consistent. I'm going to then hit the G key, which will repeat the last command, and keep faces can be on now, and I'm going to pull in all of those faces quite a bit of distance, and that gives me a nice base shell. Alright, now that I have that base shell, I'll kind of click away and hit my Q key to get my selection, and now I can start working on more elements to this geometry. So let's go ahead, and remember we're trying to do a high and low poly. So the first thing I want to do is I want to bevel this cube. So let's run our bevel tool and let's see what we get. So edit mesh bevel, and you can see we get some decent edges. I want to add a few more or a few less of a fraction and maybe a few more segments just to round it off. And having beveled edges is really important because it will help later on in the normal map baking process. Really everything in real life has a bevel to it, even if it's like microscopic. You guys can see that there's some roundness to it. Alright, so now that we have that, we have a couple of other options. At this point I could go ahead and add divisions, and I could use this as my low poly shell. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, and I'm going to call this low poly and save. And I'm going to go ahead then and duplicate this just to the side here, and I actually have to remove that. I did it in a little backwards order, so right click, remove selected, turn off my visibility, and now I can work on my high poly shell. So now I have the ability to add more divisions and work through this a little bit more. So we have a couple of options here. One of the options we have is we can actually go and add edge loops using our multi-cut tool, and I could go through, and because my geometry looks good, I can add more. I could use my smooth mode, so if I hit 2 on my keyboard, it gives me the illusion of what it will look like smooth, and that's probably the next step I would do. And we could go through with 2 mode and kind of add a few more edge loops here and there, and you know, if we wanted to, we could actually go and extrude pieces of wood in here. So I could hit mesh extrude. We could kind of start extruding those out. We would have to add a few more cuts here with our one tool. So oops, there we go. So we could add more functions this way, and that looks alright. I mean, if we wanted to add bars or something to this. For our sake, I'm going to go back a little bit and take some of these out because I do like the way we have it. I'm going to add more geometry in the sense of what's happening on the face. So to do that, I'm going to introduce some more geometry to this scene. So I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to create another cube. And I'm going to do a quick save, so continue save. And I'm going to make kind of a 2x4, and that's important. And what you can also do is continually, by hitting 0, this will move back. And let me grab my polygon cube here. And it looks like I may have hit cube twice, so let's get rid of that one. 5 on my keyboard. Oops, there it is. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead before I do anything here, and I'm going to bevel these edges. I'm going to add a few segments here. And I want to make it touch, but not really. I want some area, some space between these elements. So I'm going to do that. That looks pretty good. Command D. Command D. And I'm going to just space these accordingly. Command D. Command D. That's looking good. Those are some good looking planks. Alright, so I'm going to go and group these with Command G. Modify, center pivot. I'm going to Command D to duplicate. And I'm going to rotate, so I'm going to nudge it. And actually, if you hold the J key down after you start rotating, it will rotate it in specific degrees, which is kind of a nice little function. For our sake, we can just type 90. And we're going to then move those here. Now, we're using this as a high poly model, so we're going to have some interpenetration of geometry, so be aware of that as you go. Command D again and shoot those planks to its adjoining side. That looks great. Command D again, and let's rotate this in this direction. Notice how I used my 90-degree mark here to kind of really help dictate where these items are going to be and where they're going to end up. That looks pretty awesome. And then Command D one more time. There we go. I dig that. Alright. Now that I have those in place, I can kind of move forward here. Let's hit Command D one more time, and let's create kind of a cross beam here for the top. That looks awesome. Again, I'm using my beveled geometry, and I want to make it just rest on top, so I may actually shrink this down a little bit. Just, you can kind of still see it, so just where you can't see it, go to vertex mode here, and gently nudge these up. Vertex mode on this side, gently nudge these. Now I could add divisions on these if I'd like. I'm kind of digging this so far. I do need to move it up just slightly so I can actually see it. So that's looking really good. Maybe some of these have like screw holes or nail holes. So again, I can do that with my sphere tool. And let's move the sphere tool out of the way and hit F. And let's cut this in half. Grab half of it, hit delete. And we're going to just do this for a few parts of it, just to get you guys the idea of kind of where you could take this. So 90 degrees this way. Maybe we'll use these as nails or screws on the crate itself. So having visual reference is going to be very important for you all when you make this. Mainly because then you're not flying blind, so to speak. So let's go up here and let's shrink these. Again, we would never really do this on a low poly model. It would take up too much room, but for a high poly model, what the hey. So take these, let's group them, modify center pivot, Command D, and let's Command D them all the way on their respective counterparts. Perfect. Alright, when we have all those, we can highlight just the groups in here, group all those again, Command D, drag them down. So you can see we're getting a high poly crate. with very little extrusion in the sense of that. We're just kind of building up upon it. And at this point, what we can do is actually grab everything here, and we can, first thing I would do is delete my history, and the second thing is I would do a mesh combine. I'm not too worried about geometry in here, I'm just worried about creating a nice high poly mesh. So when I do my mesh combine, and then I run a modify center pivot, as always, and then after the combine, delete by type, just to get rid of some history. Now you can see I have one P cube in here, and I realize I just actually deleted my low poly cube, so I'll have to import that down the road there. But now I have the ability to create a new layer and call this high poly cube. So let's put that in and make sure that's on that layer. Great. And let's do the new cube here. And we're going to have to kind of work backwards now because I won't lie, I messed up a little bit by deleting. I didn't name my low poly cube. I should have named it, then I would have known not to delete it. But it's an easy fix, so I'm going to grab my faces and just really quickly run through and extrude again and turn faces off, and scale them down using the as a template. Hit G on my keyboard, turns everything back on, and scale them in a little bit. That looks pretty good. And there we go. I may run a quick bevel and add a few more segments here, maybe 2, and then maybe do a quick 1 division add, just so we have some faces to kind of play with. Alright, now the trick with this is my low poly. I can add that back to my low poly. I have a low poly and I have a high poly, and now we can start. The next step is making normal maps. So before you get started on this, what you really should do is name them. So low, cube 9 now is going to be called high. And what we want to do is we want to go to our UV editor, and if we look, we have a lot of shared seams, and we're going to get some weirdness in our normal map this way. But if I wanted to, I could run an automatic map and separate these. Now, in this case, it could work either way. We may have to go readdress this. So I'm going to undo and leave it the way it is, because I'm kind of remaining in still a square. We'll learn more about UVs as we go on. But for now, I want to put them right on top of each other, as you can see. And I'm going to save my file, save as, and we'll call it crate transfer map ready. And hit OK. And there we go. So now we have 2 high poly and low poly crates that we can kind of get moving along. So in the next lesson, we're going to actually learn how to do a normal map of these two, and we'll learn the ins and the outs of what works and what doesn't, and we'll go from there.